I already knew I was going to say yes because I already liked him so much. My heart was already there. You just being in a protective mode to just kind of let's say, oh yeah, we're just friends. But I'm just like, but all the while I'm praying.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Whether you've been married 1 or 20 plus years, at some point, you realized you were married into crazy.
And that's what our podcast is all about. We offer love, laughter, and a dose of reality as we unpack this crazy thing called marriage.
So sit back, relax, and get your ear hustle on. It's time to start the conversation.
All right, let's go.
Yo, what's up? It's your boy E.T. Look, if you're looking to or you got to raise the bar on your marriage, you gotta click the link and get into Married into Crazy, y'all. I'm telling you, this coaching is gonna take your relationship to another level. Now look, you already know you need to raise the bar. You know that already. So stop thinking or overthinking. Click that link, and Marriage into Crazy is gonna take you and your spouse to marital bliss. Now you know. Click the button. Let's go.
Welcome to another episode of the Married into Crazy podcast with Snooks and Lovey. I'm Lovey.
I'm Snooks.
And ladies and gentlemen, we're always pleased to bring you amazing couples from around the world. And most recently, if you think back over the course of the last 8 months or so, I had the privilege of being on a podcast with one of my mentors, Dr. Mike Patterson. And Mike, when we got through with because he launched an incredible podcast, and when he finished up with us, he was like, "You have to meet my friend Darrell. You guys I have to connect you two." And it was like his mission to put us together. And Darrell Williams was actually on Mike's podcast as well. And so over the course of months, we've traded emails. It never really aligned. There were things going on. But finally, we were able to get Darrell and his beautiful wife, Veronica, to be on the Married into Crazy podcast. How are you two doing?
Hey, we're
Doing great.
We're glad to be here.
Yes.
And so a lot of times what we don't do is go deep into like telling backgrounds and all that, because we always have a tendency to screw it up. I'm just being honest. So what I'd love for the two of you to do is just briefly, because it's not about your professional careers, it's more about you as a couple. But just kind of give some background, like who are you? What do you do?
Sure. So for us, again, Darrell and Veronica Williams, been married for 24 years now. And we both grew up in Compton, California, right? For those that saw the movie Boys in the Hood and Straight Outta Compton, that's kind of our backgrounds. Interestingly, we went to middle school and high school together, but never dated. We always knew the same people, had the same friends. And then for me, I joined the military, went to the Army straight out of Compton and back in '84 and never looked back. And Veronica went on to college and stayed in the area. And then when I joined the military, one of the jobs that I had did a lot of travel, and it brought me back to California a lot. So as we were gearing up for our 10-year reunion, I would go back to on these trips. And every time I would go, I would meet with 3 friends. The next time I would come, we'd ask 6 more friends. And it was like just building up. And then one of the times I was going, someone said, "Hey, you remember Veronica?" I was like, "Oh yeah, she was really smart." And he was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna invite her the next time and we'll all, get together." But she could never make it because she had a lot of things she was doing with her family, and she was involved in ministry as well. And then one day I was like, "Oh man, she couldn't make it." I said, "Let me go ahead and see if she wants to just have lunch," right? Because we would normally stay in downtown LA, and she didn't really know me like that, so I would make sure it was in a safe environment in public, right? And she came and we had lunch and just caught up on each other's careers and ministries, and we were like, "Hey, let's just stay in contact." And then when the 10-year reunion came, right, really had a chance to kind of just, see her a little bit more and talk to her and all the other old friends. And one thing I always love about the reunion is, come out of Compton, everybody got good jobs and things like that, but nobody's really rolling with business cards back in that day, right? It was like, unless you was really serious, you had business cards. I remember people writing down each other's phone numbers and to stay in contact, and I gave out business cards. And I love when the table that Veronica was at, when I left, all the other people was like, he probably don't even work there. He probably made those cards up just for the reunion. And even though we weren't even together, she was already defending me back then and said, I don't know, I think he does work at that place, you know. So she had my back in before we became a couple, you know. And then, like I said, I was in the military and I was getting ready to go to Korea for a year. So I moved in with one of my best friends to save some money. And me and Veronica kept talking. And I never forget, my friend was like, man, what if she's the one? And I'm like, the one what? I'm about to go to Korea. I'm not going to have her wait for me like that. That's not fair. But the more we started talking, I was like, man, she really could be the one. And told my roommate, I said, hey, man, I think I'm going to propose to her before I go to Korea. He's like, what? That's cool, man. That's cool. So I had the ring. And when I was getting ready to go to Korea, there was two places I can fly out of. It was St. Louis and Seattle. And I remember calling and saying, hey, can I fly out of Seattle? And they were like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. So I reached out to Veronica, like, hey, I'm going to Korea. She didn't know anything, right? It was just total surprise. And I said, hey, let's meet in Seattle, you know, 2 separate rooms, you know, all that good stuff. And we'll just enjoy that weekend together. And she said yes. And I'll turn over to her for that part.
I said yes. Well, I would meet him. I said, oh, I have some vacation time. Let me back up. We spent hours on the phone.
That's true too.
And at the reunion, I did defend him. I was letting, I was trying to, these were friends that were not in good relationships anyway. And so they had a negative mindset. I was always a positive influence. So, of course, I naturally had my defense up for him because I'd already knew of him and knew that he was in the military. And that's where his military background had taken him. So we go to see, before we go to Seattle, though, Darrell calls me, and we would already had spent like several hours on the phone. And I left to go somewhere else. I come back home. He left me a message. And I was like, oh, Lord, I'm not answering that to 3 days. You're going to definitely have to show me what this call means because you answering threes. I'm not going to call him. I think it was like a Sunday. I said, I'm not going to call him till Wednesday. And so we finally, when we did talk on the third day on Wednesday, and that's how we generated this conversation to get to where we were in Seattle. Seattle was very nice. We had just, gotten there, settled in. We go to dinner and we are having dinner. The waitress was determined to give me a dessert. I said, no, thank you. I'll just have my meal. He was like, no, you're going to have a dessert. I was like, no. He said, okay. So he comes back, and you know how the French have the silver cover over the desserts. I don't know if I could describe that to you.
Yes.
So he said, here's your pie. And I'll never forget to this day, 24 years later, his name was James. And he was like, here's your pie. And it was something about the pie, just how he said it. I was like, oh, no, I didn't, request pie. So then he took the lid off. Darrell was ready to grab it, and it wasn't a pie, it was the ring. And I began to hyperventilate. They had to go find a brown paper bag. And we're not just sitting in a booth, we're sitting in the center of the restaurant where there's people up top. It happened to be a second floor, all of that, everything is around me. People are clapping their hands. Darrell gets down on his knee. And naturally, I say yes. And all you hear is just clapping in the restaurant. And that is really how we developed. We got to the point of the engagement. And then we began to just go from there. Wasn't expecting it. I just knew that he had become a really, really good friend. And I think based on our spiritual backgrounds, I think that's where the kinship connection came. And while we're in Seattle, we did go to church. And we go, and back then they would ask you to stand up and everyone had to introduce themselves. So we stand up. I'm holding Darrell's hand because he was like pulling me to get up. I'm like, I'm not getting up. I'm not. So when the pastor said, okay, what about this lovely couple over here? And Darrell said, oh, Darrell and Veronica Williams. I said, Lord, is he lying in church? I mean, I got the ring on my finger, but is he lying? We hadn't said I do yet. I just said yes. So that's pretty much it. But just our background, our connection, and most importantly, our spiritual life and what God was doing with us is really what let us know that either one of us was who God wanted us to be. And that's really how Darrell and Veronica has lasted for 24 years.
That's so funny. So, did you have a contingency plan if she was just like, no, I'm not taking the dessert? I just flat out.
So good question. So that's where my military background kicks in. I had did a trip there before, so that's why I said God really orchestrated this thing. So I already knew the hotel we were going to. I had already called them back and said, "Hey, you probably don't remember me, but I was there doing a military recruiting trip." They're like, "Oh yeah, we remember you guys. Y'all were really nice, big tippers, you know." And I was like, hey, I'm gonna, propose. So I already had everything laid out. So it was so military strategically set where it was like there was no contingency because the thing was just laid. And I even told James, I said, Trevor, she's not gonna order dessert, but bring the case anyway. And he's like, oh, I got you, Mr. Williams, I got you. So it was already laid. The only thing I didn't plan for was the hyperventilation piece. I didn't know that she was gonna hyperventilate like that. But definitely was well worth it. And like I said, no backup plan. It was one of those like there is no plan B. It's like, no, this is kind of it. But in some of our earlier conversations, it definitely was a lot of hints. Like if somebody was to propose to you, and what would that answer look like, and all that. So I had enough hints where it was like I think it was in the safe zone.
Yes, it was it was definitely in the safe zone, because what we actually had become really good friends.
That's true.
And I would say he had become my male best friend. And by that time, we were very comfortable with each other. So it wasn't a matter of, what would I say? I already knew I was going to say yes because I already liked him so much. My heart was already there. You just so being in a protective mode to just kind of let's say, oh yeah, we're just friends. But I'm just like, but all the while I'm praying, and I'm from a very, I was from a predominantly all women's family. It was a lot more girls than boys, and the women were more domineering and more opinionated, and I kind of got out of that cascade of it. And so no one knew that I was going to be, they knew my parents, even though I lived on my own, my parents were still concerned with me going away to just go visit a friend that they hadn't met yet. And so we had that in the background. I went on this trip, not anticipating coming back with a ring.
The ring.
So that was all a lot of little dynamics there, but it all worked itself out, and we planned our wedding. And when he went to Korea, he sent me a ticket back already to go there. So I spent like a Thanksgiving there, and that's where we planned our whole wedding.
And part of that was, you hear those stories about guys in the military. Oh, those guys in the military, be careful. So one thing I wanted to do is, just out of respect to her, like I wanted her to understand what she was getting into. I mean, luckily I didn't have a regular military assignment where it was like a Fort Bragg or a Fort Hood or that was we call a special assignment, but still the military piece was there. So one thing I wanted to do was make her as at ease as possible. So part of her coming to Korea is I wanted her to see like this is what the military environment is like. I wanted her to realize what she was getting into. One thing I also did, I bought her a book called it was like something about what military spouses should know. Right. And it was like everything, like this is how much money they make, this is what they do, these are the benefits, here's what this means. So I just wanted her to really understand like this is the military environment. And I want to answer as many questions as I can so you can feel comfortable, because there are going to be times where I'm going to be traveling and you're going to be away from family, and you have to kind of create this support system here in Maryland, because that's how the strong marriages survive. Because if you don't have a support system, you come to yourself, you're by yourself, you get frustrated, like, what am I doing here? I don't even know anybody. So I just try to put as many things in play to make sure that when she did move, that she felt comfortable.
Well, that's really interesting to me. Now, you said Fort Bragg and all that. So were you Army?
Yes, I was in the Army, military HR.
Oh, I missed it. See, selective hearing. I'm Air Force. I don't listen to Army, so.
Gotcha.
No, but it's funny. I was 8 years in, and all 8 years was in support of the Army in some capacity. So I was either working avionics on A-10s, working closely with air-to-ground support for Army, or when I went to Satellite Command, or Space Command, and the satellite,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
we worked very closely with the Army because we were getting the feeds in order to actually find Patriots to shoot them down. So I've always had a close relationship with the Army. But when you said that, what's really interesting to me though is that while I was in, particularly when I was stationed overseas, and I will admit that as a man, you go through several metamorphoses. And let's just talk about the early Ernie. That guy does not exist anymore, though.
Right.
It was like the black and white silent film version of me.
Yes.
I had a hand in messing up a lot of marriages. Um, and then as I elevated and grew and transformed, I had a lot of friends that were married, and yet I had never heard of a book like that. And I know people to this day that would have been in a much better place had they had some foresight to get a book talking about what it meant to be a spouse, or even just being married, period, in the military, what that entails, even aside from the financial piece of it. So I think that's really interesting that you had that foresight at a young age.
Yeah, because, well, let me back up. I'm not too young, because we got married when we were, what, 32? Yeah, we were 32. So I was pretty much on the last end of my career. But like you said, saw so much, had a lot of great mentors. I saw how their marriages looked, and it was like, okay, I get a chance to do something like that, get into a real serious relationship. Like, it's almost like, what could I do to make sure that that other person felt comfortable? And that was kind of like my mission. And like Veronica said, by her being a good friend of mine, like, I don't even want to mess up the friendship. So to me, that gave me even more purpose to, make sure she feels comfortable, right? She's from this big family. She's leaving California, coming all the way to Maryland. It's like, it was like a heavy weight on me. Like, I have to make sure she feels comfortable. Because I wanted to make sure that, like, I knew I was going to be okay, but now it's me and somebody else. So it's not just me. It's like, I got to make sure she's cool, she's great. And like I said, that book really, like you said, it really did a lot. They bring her to Korea was good too, because in Korea, this is in Youngsan. So, she's seeing, tanks rolling down the street, preparing for exercises, and she's like, whoa, this is real. I'm like, now when I go to DC, it's not this real, but I need you to see how it could be. And I think that was my biggest thing, is I don't want her to have any surprises.
I think that's beautiful, especially when you talk about your relationship with the Lord, just the fact that you prepared everything, or you wanted her to be prepared. It makes me think back to in the beginning, with Adam, everything was set up on the scene before Eve came. And it was like you were kind of, maybe it not thinking, oh, I'm going to be Adam, or, how the Lord placed it, but that it follows that. You made sure that everything, all areas were covered before you brought Veronica on the scene. I like that. That's beautiful.
And also my mother made sure too.
I know that's right. I know that's right.
She made sure, because I had uncles that had been in the military, and my mother knew the background of that with her brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the first questions she asked Darrell, and I kicked her under the table, she said, so are you marrying her so you can increase your base pay?
Hey,
and I'm
real.
like, Mom, how did he? And I'm saying, how did she even know that? But my mother, she had my back. She was like,
She
I'm
got
making
brothers.
sure like this
Hey.
is real. So I was really thankful for her experience because we had already had talks. My father happened to be out of town that particular weekend, but we still took my mother to breakfast so they can just have a one-on-one without the siblings. We were going to have a day when he was going to meet the siblings and the family. But for that particular time, we wanted that by ourselves. But my mother, she held her own.
I know that's right.
And that's real talk for those people out there. So for all the listeners, if you don't understand or know the military, I can't tell you how many people I knew that were in the dorms that decided to get married just so they can increase their pay. They were not a couple. They were doing it for financial gain. That is so real.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's real. And but that was a good part about me and my personality. Like, most of the time I'm very humble. I don't tell everybody what I did. Like, I'm in the Army, human resources, communications organization. But when moms throw questions like that, I was like, oh, okay, now I get to open up the big boy bag. I was like, oh, so first of all, no, I'm not marrying her for increasing my pay. I'm already a senior NCO, senior manager in the military. I work for the White House Communications Agency, one of the top agencies in the military. I'm one of the best at what I do. Already get special duty pay, right? So I'm actually set. If I retire, I'm good. So no, it's actually because I love your daughter.
That's awesome. So let's take. I know you're both people of faith. I understand it. I think that you had mentioned that. I know I read that you were in ministry, but I want to say I want to believe that Darrell said that even when you guys in your friendship that you were already involved in the ministry.
Yes.
And we talked to, and Snooks alluded to how in the beginning in Genesis it talks about how the setting was made prior to Eve arriving. One of the things that we do with the couples that we coach and that we counsel are we always bring it back to when they talk about the challenges they're having. We like to point out that there was no mention of the enemy, of the devil, until Eve came on, until the covenant was in place. And so to think that you're not going to have challenges is naive, because the moment you say I do before God,
it's on.
It's exactly. It's home, right? That's the cue for the enemy. If it was a cue in the Bible, it's the cue in your life. That's when the enemy will really start to show up and show out. So my question to you is, once you actually, even though you were seasoned and you were involved in the ministry, when you said I do, what were some of the early challenges that you faced that perhaps you didn't anticipate, and how did you overcome them?
I think for me, because when we got married, I was already a youth director. I had already told her that I felt God was calling me for something bigger. So it was kind of like that opt-out clause. Like, I'm telling you right now, I'm probably going to be a youth minister. I'm probably going to call me a youth pastor. If none of that sounds like it's something you can do, I totally understand, because I know the burden, right? Not only being a military spouse, but then being a spouse of a ministry leader. And one of the things that helped me out, and I'm big on this even in the military, is finding mentors. I tell anybody, the couples that we coach, like, we tell them, like, when we finish with this, we're going to assign you to a mentor. And whether you use them or not is on you. But mentors are so big. So I had mentors that were in the military, right? Performing at the highest level, and asking those guys, like, how do you maintain that marriage? How did you keep the focus, right? And then I had ministry leaders that were other youth pastors, right? And even other pastors. I would say, hey, what do you do to make sure that you guys are, going to stick together, right? What are some of those things? And man, I had some great mentors that was like just raw with it. It was like, yo, man, don't take every preaching assignment. Don't take every this, right? Make sure when you get ready to get an invitation, run it past your wife first. Don't be trying to cop out. Like, when I'm doing the Lord's will, what do you mean? Should we do that? Right? So bringing all those things to the forefront and having those mentors, it really helped me. I think probably the one challenge that came that I wasn't too sure about early on was just the timepiece, as far as how to really divide up your time. It's like, I know to bring it to her and allow her to be a part of the scheduling, but it's like, okay, but once all that's done, how do you still maintain being there for these kids, putting these youth programs together, and still being a good husband and showing them like this is what it looks like. And I think that was one of the challenges of just trying to maintain that balance.
I like that. What about you, Veronica?
I would say the biggest, I had no problem with where God, with the calling that God had on his life, because I too had a calling on my life. And it was way beyond being a youth Bible study teacher, a women's ministry leader. It was far beyond that. I think the biggest challenge was the morning. I don't know how I knew, but it was a Sunday morning, and I just did not want to go to church that day. I didn't want to go to church that day because I guess as I was dreaming through the night, that I knew that he was about to accept a higher calling, which was going to require more of us. Not that we weren't given it all already, but it was going to be require more. And what that was is that the challenge was when he had to accept his calling to say, I'm here to be a minister of the gospel. And I wasn't afraid of that piece of it, but I knew it was going to require more of us. And we didn't have kids, so we were already giving of ourselves. But I did go to church that day, and I knew when the time came, we were going to go up. And I went up with him. So I had his support. But I think it was just, when we talk about the enemy, I think it was the enemy trying to keep me from keeping him for accepting the call that God has on his life. And I say that because women have a lot of influence. God gives men the power to, or the call to be the provider, and the women are the nurturers. But the women really have more of the nurturers as to how good or how bad a relationship is really going to be. And so when I recognized that, I knew that he had to accept the call on his life. I knew that it was the proper time. It was nothing to hinder us. But I had to ask God to help me with my own fear of being married to a man that's going to now have an official title of minister. Because I wasn't about names. I wasn't about that. We were good as long as he was youth director, and I was youth assistant director. We were good with that. Right. But now, God, you're about to say minister. Oh my goodness. But it was okay. And the reason why that was a challenge for me is because even from a little girl, my godparents were pastors and a first lady. And they had a really good life, a thriving life. In fact, when Darrell talks about mentors, they were my mentors outside of my parents, but they were my mentors along with my sisters. And I say that I saw all that they gave, and they never had children. In fact, they were my godparents because my mom had so many kids. And when I came along, they wanted me. And so I saw what they went through, but more so, I saw what a lot of first ladies went through growing up. But God said you have to flip the script. I showed you that, so you'll see what not to do. I showed you that your life doesn't have to end up with what you see. That's right. And so with that, I knew what type of man Darrell was. I knew one of the things that I liked about him was his real truthfulness and authenticity of really being a man of God, or a man sold out for God, and me being the woman that I was and a woman sold out for God. Why wouldn't I support him? So I would say that would be the challenge. But once we overcame that day, you wouldn't have even thought, when we had dinner with our pastor and wife later on that day, you wouldn't have ever thought that I had that morning fear. But and now that we've done that, and I since have accepted my call to be a minister, I think is where God intended for us to be along the way. It just was the journey that we had taken to know that through thick and thin, through death do us part, this is what I have for you. So that's how we live our life.
And that's what she said. I thought about it. One of the other challenges that I had to deal with was the differences. Like, even though I knew God had a call in her life, and this, or men just have a way of trying to fix stuff all the time, right? So it was like, I think I know where God is taking you. I know what we can do. Let me push you on this. Let me do that. And God had to do with me was like, dude, you're the extrovert in the relationship. She's not the extrovert. Her pace is not your pace. Her call is not your call. But part of me was, I wanted her to know that she wasn't just a sidekick. Like, I always knew, like, my biggest thing is everybody's a leader, regardless of where you are in your life. And my thing was, I was trying to push her as much as she needed to get to where it was that God was taking her. And I had to learn, like, yo, dude, slow down, right? Her path is not your path. Her speed is not your speed. You got good intentions, but you got to slow down. So that was a constant challenge with me is, okay, do I push right now? Do I not push? Right? And then she said, well, hey, I think I need help on this. I'm going full force. You need a scripture? I put down the scripture. How can this be a possible book? I can read, like, whoa, I'm just asking for a scripture. So I had to learn to slow my roll and not push it so hard. But a lot of that came from when we got our marriage counseling. I'll never forget Pastor Hayman. When we sat down with him, we had to do, these assessments. When we came together, and he told us, like, don't look at each other's, don't do it together, don't try to do it separately. And when we turned it in, he's looking over the paper like, I'm like, no, what are you talking about? We already got this marriage ready. What is And two things he said was, first of all, he said, I've never looked over a couple's paperwork that showed that they were so meant to be together. I've never seen any paperwork like this ever. Like, I see no red flags. I see no this or that. Right. So I'm like, whew, that's good to know. But then the one thing that he said that I always took to heart was, he said, Darrell, he said, I'm going to make this easy for you. You got one job to do in this marriage. And I'm like, dude, you talking to a military man. I love jobs. You tell me what I need to do, and I'm gonna go ahead and full force. And he said, your one job is to make sure that she fulfills God's purpose in her life. He said, if you do that one job, everything else will fall into place. And I took that, and to this day, I run with that.
Yes, he does. But I think it's because God knows I want to do it. I forgot the term. I can really be an introvert. I really don't mind being by myself. I really don't mind. I'm very humble with what I do. I don't like to be the spotlight. Well, that's a different story 24 years later now. But but during that time, it was a different season. God knew that it was a season that I would do. I'm good with whatever you need me to help you with, but don't be trying to give me no title. Just let me just do me, let me just do me with no title. I don't need you to cap it with a minister. I don't want to say assistant, nothing. Just let me just do ministry. And I think that was it. But then the more that, you grow in God and you grow in his grace, you grow in his mercy, and you grow in the calling and the anointing that he has on you, it really doesn't matter. So, with that said, he has always been there. I've always been there for him as well. But sometimes, as we've learned over the years, husbands are quick to be a fixer. Wives only want a comment sometimes. They don't. We come home, we tell you something. We don't mean you to go into action.
Amen.
This is not the war zone right here.
Amen.
Amen. And so we learn with that. So so now I preface it. I say, honey, I just want to say something to you, but it's not. You don't have to do anything. Just listen. So you have to learn that. And I say that to couples. Just learn who you are and be who you are, and learn to clarify with your spouse whether you need them to fix it right now, or whether you need them to just be a listener, or whether you need, you don't really need no action done. I just need you to just sit here and be in the moment, just have the presence. And so we've now learned how to do that.
First off, let me just stop you there. I don't know if the Lord put in your heart to come on here and counsel us. I don't know. I don't appreciate y'all coming out calling me out like that. No, it's a lot of the same. You know, it's funny. I do have to say this, that we've had other marriage coaches on as well, and I know that early on, Snooks was like, "Why would you bring people on that do what we do?" And I think this is an opportune time to really remind the audience that when you have a calling for marriage to lift up the covenant, it's not about us. It's about God's covenant, right? And I liken what you do, and you do it well. And we've had like Quest and Faith and some of these other couples that we've had on that do the same thing. It's like an instrument. It's like a guitar, where you have an instrument, which, let's say the instrument is the covenant of marriage. But in that instrument, there's 6 different strings. There's actually 12 string guitars. There's a variety of them, right? Each one of those strings is tuned to a different harmony. And when you play it well together, when you play them individually, it's a beautiful sound. But when you get to the point where you can play them together, that's when the instrument is actually elevated. And I think that each of us, we might be saying the exact same thing, but there's a harmony that you speak with, and your experience will elevate and harmonize with people that need to hear it. Same with us, same with another couple, same with, so I think that there's something to be said about this message, because our commitment is to really positively impact 1 million couples. And people always ask, well, how are you going to do that? I'm like, it's not necessarily, it might be indirectly. We might be providing exposure to someone in our audience, to you, that will actually get them to reach out to you. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be in the DMV area, in that DC, Maryland area. And I love what you're talking about. So I'd love to hear something about how did you guys come to get into this marriage coaching arena with, Alliance seminars?
What an incredible couple. If you're enjoying the interview with Darrell and Veronica Williams, you definitely have to subscribe and come back next week to hear the rest of the story.